Number one, no war. It'll be catastrophic economically across the world and also just on a personal human cost. No one wants that. So this is the most challenging time I've seen in my 32 years of active duty. The Japanese, who I work with each day, consider Japan is like Poland. The Philippines is like Romania. China is like Russia. Taiwan is Ukraine. That's where Japan sees their role to help prevent a conflict and defend their country. The greater threat to Japan's sovereignty is the People's Republic of China, particularly the People's Liberation Army. The People's Liberation Army would have to at least block, if not outright seize, some of those islands. Yonaguni, closest to Taiwan, about 100 kilometers from Taipei, to isolate Taiwan from an intervention by Western forces. The focus has shifted to the real problem today and tomorrow, which is protecting the sovereignty of Japan. And the foundation in this region has changed really to the PRC's unwarranted aggression. I'll just try to give everyone a little bit more perspective, what we do and who we are as U.S. Army Japan and the current regional security environment and how our Japanese counterparts in particular see that, because we live here and work with them every day. So this map is kind of what the Japanese refer to as the lid map. At the bottom of the map, you see the continent of Asia, and its orientation is to the east, to the top of the map, where you see the first island chain. Which I've drawn probably illegibly and not being able to read with a black marker, but it encompasses the northern territories from Russia, Japan, Taiwan, Philippines, and keeps going down to the South China Sea. So who are we at U.S. Army Japan and what do we do? We are the stand-in force for the U.S. Army on the knife edge of freedom. That first island chain geography matters. And across that first island chain of freedom-loving allies and partners between South Korea, Japan, the Philippines, and Taiwan itself is three authoritarian regimes who don't have everybody's best interest in mind. And we'll talk more about Russia, DPRK, or North Korea, and the People's Republic of China. But we stand in Japan, along with our brothers and sisters from the Navy, the Air Force, and Marines, and provide crisis response options for any of the aggregated threats and what might happen or portend in a crisis in this region in the future. And part of that is assuring allies in the region, of which we have Japan, South Korea, and Philippines, treaty allies in the first island chain, Australia, New Zealand, of course, and not too many people know that Thailand is a treaty ally and has been since 1833 with the Treaty of Amity. So the majority of the United States' treaty allies are right here in the Indo-Pacific. And we don't have a NATO construct like Europe, where almost 31 nations now are working together to deter further Russian aggression. So the assurance of allies and partners is part of what we do, but our physical presence and what we do each day is part of a deterrence, an integrated deterrence calculus of the posture of our forces, the capabilities of those forces, the signaling of what those forces can do, and lastly, the will and resolve. That little equation I just gave everyone is kind of how integrated deterrence works in the physical world. It's the posture, the capabilities, the signaling of what it can do, and the will and resolve to use that. We're part of that equation with the joint force. You can't build trust in a crisis. So being here forward deployed and stationed with our Japanese counterparts, working with them every day, they see us, talk with us, know us, we know them. And so know where the boundaries of trust and what we can do together. So we call all this in the map here, the first island chain, the knife edge of freedom. Because of the freedom of movement, the freedom of choice, the freedom of thought expression that these nations that we work with and live in all agree to in the rules-based international order, is opposed by those authoritarian regimes I mentioned. And in fact, People's Republic of China, the pacing threat for not only my country, the United States, but as Japan articulated in their national security strategy last December, is also their ultimate challenge economically, diplomatically, and militarily in the region. And other countries agree with that sentiment that the PRC is a strategic challenge long-term. And it's not original thought to say the 21st century will be defined by the challenge the PRC has against the rules-based international order. And so our goal in the U.S. Army Japan and my headquarters and Indo-Pacific Command, number one, no war. Any conflict in this region is going to be horrific. As we watch Ukraine and Russia on the second invasion from Russia into Ukraine now over its year since February of 22, it's horrific at scale, the loss of life and infrastructure and the uprooting of civil society that's happening. One can only project what that might mean if there were a larger conflagration or conflict here in the first island chain in the Indo-Pacific. It'll be catastrophic economically across the world, and also just on a personal human cost, something that will exceed or at least equal those of World War II, where thousands of soldiers across different formations were lost in a week, something that we're not prepared to do or not want to do. No one wants that. So going back to deterrence, no war, trying to prevent that from happening. But at the same time, my formation and my joint brothers and sisters are charged with being ready and providing options for national leadership and senior leadership in our services for those options should crisis portend into conflict. So this is the most challenging time I've seen in my 32 years of active duty. I haven't seen the security framework so distressed and disarray and challenged as it is right now in 23 across the globe. We see that heat and light here in the Indo-Pacific. All of my time as a general officer in the last 5 years has been out here forward in the Indo-Pacific. So in that 5 years, we and I personally have seen some dramatic changes. One, the People's Republic of China has just belied what they want to do and some of the statements they've made publicly in some fora like the Shangri-La Dialogue, where the foreign minister says Asia is not for Asians, it's for China. The future is China in the region. And that's okay as long as it's agreed upon, but a lot of countries don't want that and the bellicose statements that come forward. Two, the COVID response. When the PRC was telling countries to recognize them, not Taiwan, and then we'll give you COVID vaccines to help save your people, was seen with an upturned eye with a lot of countries in the region and the globe, that coercive diplomacy is seen for what it is. And lastly, in the region, the Ukraine-Russia conflict, the second invasion of Ukraine, as I mentioned earlier, has caused a lot of the folks and leaders in the region to take stock and take notice. And I see that particularly here in Japan, and I see that in the first island chain itself. And when I talk to my Japanese counterparts about lessons learned that transfer or transferable to this region from the security environment, they use the geographic model that's happening in Eastern Europe right now. And I'll go back to the map and point to it. The Japanese, who I work with each day, consider Japan is like Poland. The Philippines is like Romania. China is like Russia. Taiwan is Ukraine. That's a useful tool to try to understand the security environment in Europe and where it could be a challenge similarly here in the Indo-Pacific in the first island chain. I would argue that's not exactly the national models that don't comport exactly like that, but that's where Japan sees their role to help prevent a conflict and defend their country by having more capabilities and more ties with like-minded partners and allies like the United States, invested in exercises, invested in capabilities forward to increase that deterrence framework and help them deter in this environment. And going back to what I said from 5 years ago, the defense of Japan was primarily focused on aggression from North Korea, potential crises or conflicts with North Korea, and how Japan and their sovereignty could be impacted by that. That was 5 years ago. Now it's focused on the Southwest Islands because the greater threat to Japan's sovereignty is the People's Republic of China, particularly the People's Liberation Army and the People's Liberation Army Navy that's doing drills in the East China Sea and distant sea operations east of Okinawa and the Ryukyu Islands. So Southwest Islands on this map, if I may, here, Yonaguni, closest to Taiwan, about 100 kilometers from Taipei, so about 65 miles from Taipei. You have Miyako, Ichikawa, Okinawa, Amami Island. sovereign Japanese territories that have been. And there's some key terrain discussions that Japan is worried about, that in any military operation that China has said that they would reserve the right to use military force to intervene in Taiwan, that the People's Liberation Army would have to at least block, if not outright seize, some of those islands to isolate Taiwan from an intervention by Western forces, if it's the US, Japan, or whomever. It's just key terrain. So Japan looks at that, and they've seen the threat from Chinese Coast Guard militias that have pushed out Japanese fishermen around the islands. They've seen all of these naval and air activities that have happened in and around Japanese exclusive economic zones. And just recently, when Speaker Pelosi visited Taiwan, the PRC launched, 8 missiles over Taiwan. Several of those, we believe, deliberately landed in the exclusive economic zone of Japan, in the waters off these islands, as a strategic message. And so all that to say, the focus has shifted to the real problem today and tomorrow, which is protecting the sovereignty of Japan, main effort in the Southwest Islands. We see that together very clearly, very soberly, as the greatest security challenge. We have a large number of joint forces in Okinawa. And so the discussions we've been working on is how to help Japan better posture the defense of the Southwest Islands. And we do that in several ways. One, the exercises we do through the year, of which I'm responsible for several of them at large scale exercises, Yamasakura and Orient Shield, for example, focus on that scenario. A scenario where Japan's sovereignty in the islands is compromised or flat out invaded. And it's a useful way to make sure that the defense posture is right. We learn lessons from these exercises to go forward and plan better. The second thing we do is Japan has recognized for a while they need capabilities in those islands. And so what we've done is asked where they need support from the US military in a bilateral way for some of these contingencies. As I mentioned, it's known that we have a pretty good presence with Marines, Navy, and Air Force, and some of my Army forces on Okinawa, and that's where they are. So the discussion is how can we support them in some of the island locations in a contest or in a conflict. And that focus of questioning has brought us to the table many times on some options that we can provide from the military instrument back to our policymakers in their country and in my country about those kind of investments of capabilities. And one of those has been the multi-domain task force from the Army, which provides a capability, it will, inside the first island chain, in particular Southwest Islands, to fracture potentially the anti-access area denial capabilities of the PLA. We live in the weapons engagement zone here in Tokyo, and certainly a lot more in the Southwest Islands from both North Korea and China, with a vast number of magazine depth of missiles. As an example, our contribution can be an ability to be inside that, protect from those potential missile strikes, and allow options for Japan or the Joint Force US Mil to maneuver in crises. So that's, I think, the quick answer, not so quick answer, on how we've worked together with Japan, recognizing the shift in the strategic environment and the foundation in this region has changed really to the PRC's unwarranted aggression. And Japan, I mentioned the national security documents, also released 2 other documents, their national defense strategy, what used to be called their 5-year midterm plan, which is basically their programmatics for what they're going to procure and acquire in their defense establishment going forward. All of those documents talked about the Southwest Islands. All those documents talked about counter-strike capability, more investments in land-based coastal defense cruise missiles, and also air defense protection, particularly for those Southwest Islands, recognizing that key terrain and sovereignty of Japan.
Our next question was upvoted in the question and answer tab. It comes from Jamie Akan from Taiwan Plus News, who asks, there have been reports of over 200 U.S. military personnel in Taiwan. Just wanted to ask about the significance possibly including Taiwan in joint operations exercises in the future as to rehearse and build the basis for responding to a crisis in the region.
the Taiwan Relations Act from 1979 requires the United States to provide defense articles and capabilities for Taiwan as they procure them for what is traditional foreign military sales program. And involved in that are some of the people who come in to train them on those systems. So I'm just going to say if they bought a tank that was new to Taiwan, we would, through the defense contractor and military, provide trainers to come in on how that tank is operating, how do you shoot it, move it, communicate with it, how you maintain it at scale. So if they bought 40 tanks, et cetera. So that's historically been the U.S. military's contribution for Taiwan because of the Taiwan Relations Act by law. That's what the law prescribes us to do. Not recognizing Taiwan as a country is United States policy and has been since the Taiwan Relations Act. But because of the security environment now and Taiwan's ask for more defense articles and more capability and more planning, the U.S. military is working with the State Department, the American Institute of Taiwan, AIT, to make sure they understand the framework for a potential defense in that country with defense articles. And so I think what we're seeing is not what you saw in, if you're asking, not what you saw in Ukraine, where a bunch of U.S. military went into Ukraine in 2015 and helped train all the regiments and battalion battle groups, tactical operations on how to move their formations, and they did rehearsals, and it's less that was a different construct. And this is more aligned with what our policy and law tells us to do and has always told us to do in relation to Taiwan.